today we are going to be talking about the nucleus, and we're joined by our guest speaker, Shalini. So thank you so much, Shalini, for taking out the time to do this with us, and over to you.
Hi, everyone. So it's actually very nice to be here. And I saw last week or last session, you guys worked on cell membrane. So you joined Abby and Idi to work through the cell membrane. Today, we are going to learn about something which is further inside the cell, which is the nucleus. Now, how many of you are familiar with the entire structure of a cell, or like what a cell is something that I would like to ask before I begin. So can we have a show?
Okay, perfect. Yes. So if you are familiar with what a cell is, you can let us know. If you have no idea what a cell is, that's absolutely fine as well. Just let us know in the chat window.
Yes.
Okay, so I can see Bhavik says me. I can see a few raised hands as well. So I think hopefully everybody knows
what a cell is.
Okay. What a cell is.
That's awesome. So should I share my screen, or would you be
going? If you would like to, we can quickly shift.
I'll just try. I'm not sure if I'm having some tech.
Yes, no worries at all. No worries. Okay. Okay, so by the time you're doing that, I can already, few people are saying that they do know what a cell is. Hridayanshi says it's the smallest unit of an organism. That's very clearly known. That's very good. All right. Okay, building blocks of life. Perfect. And how many of you are from India, or who know Hindi basically? I think a few. A few? Yes. Okay. Is my screen visible now? It is, but we still can see the Zoom window there. Okay, so I don't know why that's happening today. Okay. I think it's fine. Maybe I'll just continue sharing the screen from my end. Okay, sure. That works. Yeah. So I'll just stop sharing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. So go ahead, Shalini. Next, please. Yeah. So coming to what is the... Okay, I was asking something about how many of you are familiar with Hindi, because the word for cell in Hindi is actually kosh, which is very interesting actually, because it means something like a box or something like a treasure box actually. So that's something I don't know how many of you were familiar with that. You knew? Kushagra is saying me, I think. So yeah, that's awesome. Next, please. Yes. So when you draw a cell, this is basically what you draw. Next. On next slide, yeah. So on the left, you have a plant cell. On the right, you have an animal cell. The major visible difference, apart from the color, obviously, is the plant cell looks more rectangular, while the animal cell is more of a roundish shape. And both have this specific circular structure in the center, which is the nucleus that we are going to talk about today. So next slide, please. Yes. So to define it, the nucleus is small, it is round, and it is membrane bound. So if you can see, there will be a double membrane visible on both ends. So I don't know how to show it without the pointer. So with the arrows pointing, you can see there are two circular lines, which is basically the membrane bound structure of the nucleus. And inside that, you have another yellowish color. I would be coming to why a plant cell is rectangular. Just hold on. And further inside is, you can see another colored blob, which is the nucleolus. Okay, so the yellow part inside is basically something which is a jelly-like structure or component, which is called the nucleoplasm. Coming to why the plant cell is rectangular, that was actually a very good question. It is because of the structure required and because the plant cell has a much larger vacuole. So which is this aubergine-shaped structure here. Yes, exactly. So the animal cell, as you can see, does not have that. And because of the presence of a vacuole, the plant cell is more of a rectangular structure. That is the simple definition. Further details would be when you are working with a plant cell, which I am not. So coming to what the function of the nucleus is, it is basically used for controlling the cell's growth and reproduction. Next slide, please. So if you imagine each part of a cell to have its own voice, this is something like what it would say. And this diagram was not done by me. There's a very well-known illustrator known as Beatrice, who does these interesting bio-based arts. And this is what she has created. So this nucleus is the person over here who is ordering everyone around saying, everyone do what I say. And this is the person that we are going to be talking about today. If you look a little to the top, to the top right, you can see the mitochondria saying no. Would anyone be able to tell me why the mitochondria says no? Any guesses?
That's a great question. So let's see if anybody has any guesses. Why would the mitochondria say no? Pranav says because they're like kids.
That's a good
very
guess.
good one.
Good guess.
That's true.
So,
all right. Any other guesses? Why would the mitochondria say no to doing what the nucleus wants? Bhavik has a very nice answer. Bhavik says, the mitochondria was once a separate thing.
Interesting. So, should I go ahead with the answer?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So the mitochondria has some amount of the genetic material, or what we are more familiar with as DNA itself. And which is why the mitochondria does as it pleases. It's like Loki. It says, I do what I want. So if you are familiar with MCU, you will know the mitochondria is like Loki. It says, I do as what I want. Now, the DNA in the mitochondria is interestingly only from the mother. So all your mitochondrial DNA is basically something that you have had from your mother. Okay.
That's interesting. Okay. So I think, yes, Ridyanshi did say mitochondria has its own DNA. So that was a guess. Okay. I think should we move ahead?
I'll just cover the rest of the organelles here briefly. And you would be going into detail with the other guest speakers at TTAs, but I'll just give a brief overview. So the person who wants some peace and quiet because they have a lot of work is the endoplasmic reticulum. They are directly under the control of the nucleus. As you can see, the endoplasmic reticulum is continuous with the outer membrane of the nucleus. And it does the work as it translates the DNA into RNA, which is required for making the protein. I'll come to that a bit later. Now, the protein is not made by the endoplasmic reticulum. It is done by the Golgi body, which is asking for a break over here. And you can see lysosome is being very pessimistic, announcing that everything I touch, I destroy. That's because the lysosome basically comes into play when the cell is moving on towards cell death, or if there is an infection or any other damage. Golgi doesn't exactly look like a Wi-Fi symbol. I think someone asked that because I got that prompt on the screen. It looks like the Wi-Fi symbol, now that you mention it, in this diagram, in this art piece. Because it is multi-layered, and with the multi-layered, towards the end, it forms small vesicles, which will be leading to the packets. So yeah, that's what the Golgi looks like. Can we have the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So what are the parts of a nucleus? The nucleus will have three main parts, which is the nuclear membrane, the nucleoplasm, and the nucleolus. But this is something that we have already covered in the first slide when I showed you the basic diagram of a cell that we used to cover when we were in school. So next slide, please. Yeah. So coming to the anatomy of the nucleus, this is what it looks like. It's the same diagram on the left bottom corner, as you can see. I've just changed up the colors here so that it matches the expanded detailed image of the nucleus. So as you can see, the nucleus has a nuclear envelope, which is continuous in some cases with the endoplasmic reticulum. Just inside that, there is something called a nuclear lamina. So lamina is nothing, but it means like a membrane. So it is like a thin membrane, which is just inside the nuclear envelope. So if when you were working on the cell membranes during the last talk, I don't know if the nucleus membrane was covered. Was it covered?
Not in detail. We just talked about how the nucleus does have a membrane. That's it. But we didn't talk in detail about the structure or things like that.
Okay. So the nuclear envelope is basically, it has two layers. So if you can think of it like a sandwich, that's what it looks like. So the part on the outside where you can see the nuclear pores marked, that is called the nuclear envelope. And the inner side is called the nuclear lamina. Okay. So which is marked over here in the bright fluorescent pink color. Inside that is the nucleolus, which is this dark purple blob inside, which contains the chromatin. Now the chromatin may or may not be condensed because the chromatin assumes various forms throughout the life of a cell. And the chromatin is floating in the nucleoplasm, which is the jelly-like substance that I was talking about earlier. So these are the basic parts: the envelope, the lamina, the nucleolus, and the nucleoplasm, which is the jelly-like fun substance. Next slide, please. So very commonly, we have been told that the nucleus contains the genetic material or the DNA. Now, where is the DNA? So coming to that, the DNA is basically in the form of the chromosomes. Now, the chromosomes mostly look like this expanded X-like shape at a particular stage in the cell, which is when we can study them. If they're not in this particular shape, it is very difficult to study the chromosome. So this X-like shape, if you look into it further, will actually be made up of the DNA. Now the DNA has 4 types of components, like 4 proteins which make it up, which are adenine, thymidine, guanine, and cytosine. So commonly represented by ATGC, as you can see over here. So they have color coded it over here so that you can easily understand that there are different components of the DNA itself. But the DNA as a whole is what is the genetic material. And next slide, please. Yeah. So we all look different. And we are constantly saying that the genetic material, or which is something which is determining how we look, is basically found in the nucleus. So does the nucleus itself look the same in all cells? And the answer is, if anyone can answer firstly, we can take the responses first before.
Yes. Okay. Does anybody want to guess? Do you think the nucleus looks the same in all our cells? Okay. Bhavik very clearly says no.
Very good. Most of you are saying no from what I can see. From what I can hear, actually, I can't see your responses, unfortunately.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Ridyanshi says no. Shriyan says no. Shashank says no.
Okay.
Lots of no's.
Okay. So you're all correct because it does not. Next, please. Yeah, girls are different from boys because, just hold on. Because that is something, the chromosomes, that X-shaped structure that we saw in the last slide, that determines whether you will be a girl or a boy. So the shape of one of those X's is slightly different in girls and different in boys. So coming back to whether the nucleus looks the same in all cells. The cells that you can see over here are basically nothing but the blood cells. So all of you must have had small falls or scratches and seen that when you bleed, something red comes out, right? So basically that blood is made up of all these different types of cells that you can see on the slide at the moment. On your right topmost, which I have marked as red blood cells, are the erythrocytes, and they do not have a nucleus. Next. And now white blood cells, just hold on. So white blood cells are actually not one, but there are 5 different types of white blood cells. And I have spotted an error in this slide. If anyone can, I don't think any of you would be actually noticing. The spelling over here is different. It is Neu, so it's neutrophils. So white in Latin is leuco. So anything leukocyte, leukoplasm, leukemia, anything to do with white, you will find it's scientifically mostly known as leuco something. Similarly, erythro is red. So red blood cells or erythrocytes. Now cytes is basically cells in Latin. So now white blood cells, there are, as I mentioned, 5 different types. The right-hand side, the 3, as you can see, they have some pink dots in them, which are the granules. So they are the granulocytes. And on the left, they don't have dots. So they are the agranulocytes, or the cells which do not have these granules. The cornermost, which you can see has a very funny looking nucleus, is a neutrophil, or a which has a multi-lobe nucleus. The one that is pointed out. Next. Then the other granulocytes are eosinophils and basophils, which have a bilobe nucleus. The other basophil is just next to the question on top. So that is how it looks like otherwise. And then you can see the bilobe of the nucleus. So, which is basically, they have 2 lobes of the nucleus. Next. And then you have the monocytes, which have a kidney-shaped nucleus. And the monocytes are the largest of the white blood cells. Next. And then you have the lymphocytes. Now, lymphocytes can either be small or large, depending on the function they're serving at present. They keep interchanging. Now, small lymphocytes are called small because the cytoplasm itself is small, but the nucleus is very large in them. While the large lymphocytes have a large amount of cytoplasm, while the nucleus is smaller in them. So, as you can see from just the blood itself, the shape of the nucleus is not the same in all the cells. They keep differing between cells.
So, Shalini, there's a very interesting question. Ridyanshi asks, why do RBCs not have a nucleus?
That's actually a very interesting question, and I will be covering that in the following slides.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so just hold on.
Yes,
so that was the end of the basic questions. I'll come to that. So next question is, do all cells have just one nucleus? And guesses? I cannot see the responses.
So Pranav says yes. Ridyanshi says no.
Okay.
Bhavik says no. A few yeses, few nos.
Okay. I think you accidentally clicked answer. So yes, not all cells have just one nucleus. Next, please. Yeah. So as we saw in the earlier slide, the red blood cells or the erythrocytes do not have a nucleus, while the cardiomyocytes or the heart cells have a multinucleated cell. So this image is taken from a work done by Miko in a couple of years ago. And as you can see, the purple spots in them are basically what marks the nucleus. So each pink long thing is what the cell is, and the purple dots, as you can see in them, are the nucleus, so which have been already circled very helpfully by Miko himself. So yeah, so cardiomyocytes are nothing but the heart cells, and they have a number of nuclei in them. Next. So if there were there any questions regarding the earlier slide, or should I move on?
So Ridyanshi has a very interesting question. He says, why are the nucleus purple?
Okay, so nucleus is purple because the cell was stained. Now there are some stains which look purplish pink when you use them, and because of the component of the nucleus, they will turn purple, and because of the component of the cytoplasm, they will turn pink. So because Miko had used that particular stain to stain these cells, stain the heart cells, that's why the nucleus look purple while the cells themselves look pink. One of these stains is very commonly, that we commonly use, is Giemsa. And yeah, so it will depend on what kind of stain you use. In specific, depending on what stain you're using, that is what the color will look like. So the nucleus can look anything from purple to red to blue, very commonly, which is used. So yeah, that is the thing.
Okay.
So
Sukriti has another question.
Okay.
She asks, do twins always have the same DNA, and if they do, are like their cells and nucleus all the same?
No. Twins will have similar DNA, but there will be some changes, very small changes, but yes, those changes will be there. So if you do a DNA analysis, then their DNA will be different, so that you can, which is why they are two different individuals with their own characteristics, right? And twins are identical or non-identical twins. In non-identical twins, obviously it will be very different, because if in the case of non-identical twins, if one is a girl and one is a boy, as I mentioned, that X-shaped chromosome, that itself would be different. So there will be a large amount of difference. In the case of identical twins, there will be more similarities, but there will be some differences as well. Now, these differences may be either just phenotypic, or which is just superficial differences, or they might be genetic in the case of, say, for example, some DNA which codes for a specific function in your body, but that function is not coded properly in the other twin, and the other twin will have some kind of disease in that case. So yes, the twins will not have identical nuclei or cells either. It will be more similar in the case of twins than in the case of the general population, though. So
in the case of all twins, in the case of especially identical twins, the genetic material is identical, but that doesn't always mean that their cells are identical.
Genetic material is not identical. Genetic material is very similar, but it is not identical. So it's not like a stencil. There will be, like, I'm looking at an A and I'm writing an A, but my handwriting and your handwriting are not the same. So that little difference of handwriting is there, which is why it will be different. So you and I look very different because our genetic material is vastly different. But in the case of identical twins, the same person is writing the genetic material, you can say. But when you're writing, all your A's do not look identical, right? They look very similar. So it's like that. Does that explain it?
Yes. All right. Let's go ahead to the next part.
Yes. So we have constantly been saying that erythrocytes or red blood cells do not have a nucleus. Now, I will be very specific over here. Red blood cells in mammals do not have nucleus. But if you take the red blood cell of, say, a bird, you will find a nucleus. So that is very interesting to note. You can, if you're not sure what kind of, or the blood is from where, if you look at it under the microscope and the nucleus is there in the red blood cell, then it is not a mammalian red blood cell or mammalian blood. So the question now arises is, are there any mammals who have a nucleus in their red blood cell? And I'll wait for a minute to see if anyone has answers.
Okay, Pranav says maybe yes.
Yes to what?
Yes to if there are mammals who have a nucleus
Okay.
in their RBC.
Can you guess which mammal that would be?
Okay. Does anybody have guesses on which mammal that would be? Hridayanshi says no. Okay, a few guesses are dolphins, platypus, whales.
Interesting. So next slide.
Okay.
The actual answer is camels. Camels and llamas, actually. And why? Is because their red blood cells are not spherical like ours is. So their red blood cells are more oval in shape. And this is because they have to survive in the desert for a very long time. So their nucleus has the capacity to increase its size to preserve water, which is why they can survive without water for so long in the desert. So the only mammal which does not have, which has a nucleus in the red blood cell is a camel or a llama. These are the only two species. Mostly camels. Llamas, it's actually fairly recently identified that llamas also have a similar blood. Okay, so
very interesting fact.
Yeah. So
okay, so should we go ahead?
Yes, next please. So now you all were already asking whether the nucleus is similar in persons or in the same cell. So does the shape of the nucleus stay the same throughout the life cycle of the cell? Now, as you all must have already guessed, a cell does not live forever. A cell will be created, and then it will go through its life cycle, and then it will die, and then a new cell will take its place. So, as you can see, I've enlarged the endoplasmic reticulum and the nucleus and the nucleolus over here. In a specific stage called the interphase, the nucleolus, the black spot in the middle, will disappear. Once the nucleolus disappears, the genetic material or the chromosomes will condense. So as you can see, it looks like a lot of lines in the middle. So the chromosomes have condensed. And as you can see, there's a blue line that has come up also. Now this blue line is basically the nuclear lamina that I had shown when I was showing the anatomy of the nucleus. The nuclear lamina, if you remember, is the inner part of the membrane. So there are two membranes which separate the nucleus from the rest of the cytoplasm or cell organelles, right? So the outer side was the nuclear envelope, the inner side was the lamina. The lamina also will start separating. And once the cell moves into the next stage in its life cycle, which is called the prophase, the lamina and the nucleus will actually completely disrupt. So as you can see, the nuclear membrane, the black line, is completely dotted and it is disrupted. It's not a spherical structure anymore. Similarly, the blue line or the lamina is also like that. Now you can see there are yellow dots around the blue line. Now this is because phosphorus will come and bind to the lamina at this stage.
So Shalini, sorry, I think this is getting a little too complicated. Okay. Maybe we'll just simplify and summarize this in a line or two.
Okay, that's what I'll do. So basically, this was the only major part that I wanted to discuss. So the outer envelope, the outer layer of the nuclear envelope and the inner layer both are separate now. And the inner side has something called phosphorus binding to it. And the purple chromosomes have formed their very characteristic X-like structure. Now they will go through the various phases and moving on to the last stage, they will again reform, which is the telophase. And they will form two nuclei, as you can see here. Alongside the nucleus, the cell itself will also divide and there will be two cells now. So which is why there are two nucleus, as you can see in the where the cursor is. So that is how the shape of the nucleus changes during the life cycle of a cell. Next slide. Am I audible?
Yes. So in this process, not only our DNA has to double when a cell divides, but even our nucleus has to undergo changes.
Yes, because when there is, say for example, there is one person. Now there has to be two persons or two items. So the DNA itself has to divide or multiply. Biology is the only science where divide and multiply mean the same. So be very careful about that. And coming to what is the function of the nucleus. So next, please. As we had already seen in Beatrice's very cleverly done diagram, the nucleus orders everyone around. So it is the command center of the cell. So it will, next please, it will order around the other cell orbitals. It is basically the boss. And next please. So because it is the boss, it has to have the plan of what the cell will do next. So it is the one which will regulate the actions of the cell. So this is your task. First you have to do this task. Next you have to do this task. All that decision taking is the responsibility of the nucleus. Next. It will also make proteins. Now, I'm not sure how familiar you are with proteins, but most things are, in your body especially, are made with proteins. Say, for example, your skin, that is a protein. Your hair, that is a protein. You eat something, to digest it, you need proteins. You eat protein, to digest that protein, you need other proteins. So everything or a lot of things in your body are basically made by proteins. And all these proteins are made with the help of the nucleus. So it plays a very important role in creating these proteins. Next, please. And as we have all been constantly saying, it contains the genetic information. So the decision to see what happens next, that is also taken by the nucleus. Next, in the sense, the next generation of the cell. Next, please. So, given the nucleus having so many important functions, what happens if it malfunctions or if it does not function as it should?
That's a great question. So maybe we'll ask what everybody thinks. What do they think will happen if this nucleus malfunctions?
Absolutely.
Does anybody have any guesses? Type into the chat window. What do you think is going to happen? We just learned that the nucleus is the command center. It makes all the proteins we need. Pranav has a very simple answer. He says the cell will die.
Okay, that's very specific.
Okay. Other answers are the cell will collapse.
Okay.
Sashant says the earth will blow up.
To the cell, that's
okay.
what it like,
Hopefully that's not what happens. Ridyanshi says, so if RBCs don't have a nucleus, and that means there's no nucleus to malfunction. So that means RBCs are unaffected by the nucleus.
That's a very interesting observation. I will be covering that once I cover what happens when the nucleus malfunctions.
Okay. Kavish says that organelles will stop working.
Okay. Okay. More or less, you have got very good guesses. So there will be, next please. You will have some very interesting diseases such as the Werner syndrome. Next please. Next slide please. Yeah. So the next disease is called dyskeratosis congenita or congenia. There's another disease called Treacher colon. And obviously the most well-known disease that we have been hearing about all these days, cancer. That's also will happen if the nucleus malfunctions. So next, please. So for example, what is the Werner syndrome? Now, Werner syndrome is a disease in which I showed you that elaborate diagram where the cell division is happening and the nucleus is unwinding and leading to dividing into, right? So that will basically be affected in this disease. And it is a very recessive disease. So in that case, what needs to happen is it is going to be very rare. So if, say, both your parents have the gene for this disease, only then you will have it. Otherwise, you will not have it. So that's very rare cases. What happens if you have this disease is you will have wrinkles, which is basically meaning that you will look way older than your actual age. So you might actually be a 16-year-old, but you will look like a 60-year-old. So you'll have all wrinkly skin. You will lose your hair, or your hair will turn gray. You will have discolored nail, and your skin will have patchy pigments. Next, please. So it is, as I already discussed, it's going to be very rare. Now, each of these black dots is a person. So there are 1,000 dots here. And one person, so there's like one person in 1,000 people can have Werner syndrome. It is that rare. And coming to next, please. Coming to why it is happening, as I mentioned, your DNA is got double stranded, right? So it needs to split into, as you can see in this diagram, it has to split into, and then it will, then you can form a new DNA. The other part can be synthesized or created by the cell. So all this can happen because, next please, there is an, so there is a enzyme or another protein called helicase, which will help in unwinding this DNA. So basically, you all wear those zippered jackets, right? So you can imagine each side of your jacket flap to be one strand of the DNA. So when that the knob of the zipper, as it goes up, binds it together, and you have your double-stranded DNA, which is basically the DNA. And when you undo it, go the other way around, it unzips it. So that unzipping part is basically the function of the protein helicase. So that is very important. In the case of Werner syndrome, the helicase production is wrong. And so the unzipping is not done correctly. So it will get snagged in between, in the middle, like if your zipper is not working properly, you will have snags. Some of the teeth may not unlock. So all of that will happen. And which is why you have all these symptoms and leading to the Werner syndrome. Next, please. In the case of the other disease that I mentioned, dyskeratosis congenita or congenita, either way, what happens is you have abnormal nails. It's similarly another very rare disease. It is also formed because there is a problem in the creation of specific protein, which is very essential. So because of the problem in the creation of that protein, it will lead to white patches in your mouth. I had earlier mentioned that leuco is white, right? So see over here, you can see oral leukoplakia, which means white patches, plaques or patches. And then you have dots on the skin, which is reticular skin pigmentation. So you will have lots of spots on your skin. And people suffering from these are sadly will have, they will be more at risk of developing diseases like anemia. So in anemia, it's a specific type of anemia called aplastic anemia. And you can see there's a bone drawn next to it with a green arrow showing something in the bone. Can anyone guess why I'm showing that when I'm saying anemia? Any guesses?
No guesses yet.
What does a bone have to do with anemia?
Is it Sahana's the bone marrow?
Yes, very good. Absolutely correct. So basically, your blood cells are produced in the bone marrow. So your bone marrow is unable to create these cells, which is why it leads to aplastic anemia or less cells. And then there's another disease called myelodysplastic syndrome, in which the cells are irregular shaped, they are not mature. So they are basically like children and they have been given adult tasks, but they can't do the task because they are children. So that is myelodysplastic syndrome, very commonly referred to as MDS. It is like the full name is very rarely said because it's such a big name. Cancers I had already mentioned. So yeah, these people are very susceptible to developing cancers, such as leukemia. Because again, obviously leukemia is because it is a blood cancer and blood already is affected in their case because the bone marrow is affected, right? So these are the symptoms or problems associated with this disease. Next, please. So this is very rare. So that first row I had shown in the earlier slide as each dot being one person, and there were 1,000 dots in that diagram. That is the first line over here. And there are 1 million people over here. So 1 person in 1 million people is at risk of having this. So it's a very, very rare disease. Next, please. And coming to the other disease that I had mentioned, Treacher-Collins syndrome. Now, this disease again is because there's a problem in the formation of proteins, and this is basically a morphological protein. So these people have facial irregularities. Their eyes will be sloping downwards. Their cheekbones may not have the proper structure that most people's cheekbones do. Their jaw is small. Their ears will be oddly shaped. They may have a cleft palate, which is basically the part separating your mouth from your nose. So there's a direct contact over there, which makes respiratory functions very difficult or breathing very difficult. So these are the things. And there was actually a very interesting movie or book as well about this syndrome called Wonder. Next slide, please. Yeah, I put the, yeah. So this movie, which basically deals with a person who is dealing with the social repercussions of looking different from everyone else. So I don't know how many of you have seen this movie. It's a beautiful movie.
And yes, quite a few people in the chat window have already mentioned this movie when you started talking about these.
Oh, that's wonderful. So yeah, you should always be kind because you don't know why the person is looking different from you. It may be because they have some disease, and having a disease is no picnic, right? So you should always be kind or choose kind, as the movie says. So next, please. Coming to how rare it is, it happens 1 in 50,000 people. So not as rare as the dyskeratosis congenia, but more rare than Werner syndrome. Next, please. So since we see these are not the only diseases that happen if the nucleus is not functioning properly. There are some very other common diseases such as, say, sickle cell anemia, in which the nucleus is unable to code properly and the shape of your red blood cell changes. Now, the red blood cell in sickle-celled anemia basically turns into the letter C. So your RBC is not able to hold on to the oxygen that it is supposed to hold to do this. And so apart from these problems, why is the nucleus necessary? As someone had asked, the RBCs are surviving beautifully without the nucleus. Why do we need the nucleus in that case? So this is why we need it. It is involved in, next, yeah. So protein synthesis, as we had already seen. As you can see, if you put all the components in big chunks, your body will be 60% water and 16% protein, and the rest will be fats and other components. So 16% of your body is quite a lot. So protein synthesis is the major function of the nucleus. And yeah, so you need it for that. Next. It is needed for cell division. Now, this is a beautiful photograph available online. So there was no credit as to who was the original photographer for this. This is not my image. The orange ball in the middle, that is the nucleus. And as you can see, it is dividing. So even though it has to divide itself, the nucleus itself is also directing the cell that it needs to divide into 2 at the moment. So that is the role of the nucleus. Next, please. Obviously, growth. So a baby does not look the same as an adult, right? So the nucleus decides how and when the cells need to divide for that entire growth to happen. I mean, imagine a baby with a mustache. So that doesn't happen, right? That's because the nucleus knows that the baby is not old enough yet to have a mustache. So that's the thing. Next, please. And all your cells do not look alike. So these are some examples of the cells, of different types of cells. So your muscle cells, as you had already seen in Miko's photograph, heart cells look very long. Red blood cells are round in structure in mammals. For most of us, apart from camels who have an oval red blood cell, bone cells look something like Yeah, they look very weird. The
So,
nerve cell is long. So it's like that. So all the cells are different.
Shalini,
Yeah.
just there's a question.
Mhm.
The question is, we looked at like some diseases that happen if the nucleus malfunctions. But is
Yeah.
there something that happens if the nucleus like overworks?
If the nucleus overworks, in the sense overworks in what aspect? You're talking about protein synthesis?
Yeah, I think
Or
maybe just like overworks in terms of all the functions that it does. If it
yeah,
suddenly gets overloaded.
yeah. So overworks would be one will be cell division. If it starts ordering more cell division and doesn't feel like making the protein or growing or any of the other functions. So that would lead to something for like cancer. So basically cancer is when there are way more number of cells being created than required. So
So the
it's
nucleus has to function properly
it has
and
to function properly, and it has to know when to stop working also.
yes, exactly.
It needs to know to take a break, basically.
Yes, definitely.
Yes. So
Okay. I think we can move ahead and finish up till
yes,
the end of the slides, and then we'll come back to any more questions.
yes. So what can a cell survive without nucleus? And as most of you have already answered in the earlier slides, yes, it can, because RBCs don't have a nucleus, as we were talking, right? But now the interesting part here is the RBCs without a nucleus, or red blood cell without a nucleus, can survive only for 1 or 2 days, when its actual lifespan is 21 days. So when it's originally formed, the RBC will have a nucleus, as you can see, this big black structure, which turns orange and then turns purple, and then it is kicked out of the cell. Once it is kicked out of the cell, only then the bone marrow will release the RBC into the blood. And that is the red blood cell as you know it. So RBCs which are not mature yet will have a nucleus. So without having the nucleus, a cell cannot divide. So RBCs cannot divide, and so they cannot create themselves. So the bone marrow has to take the responsibility of creating more RBCs. So no, in essence, a cell cannot survive without a nucleus for a long time. It can do so for very short periods. Next. Since we were just through the COVID pandemic, does a virus have a nucleus? And I think we are running short on time. Is it?
Yes, I think we can.
Yeah, so I'll just I will not wait for responses. I'll just go on to the answer. That no, a virus does not have a nucleus. So when you read about the different types of cell, you will not read about a virus, because a virus is not a cell itself. A virus is basically not a living creature in essence, because it does not have any of the characteristics that we associate with a living cell. So it has proteins which are encapsulated in an envelope, and it has some sort of genetic material, but it is not life. It is more like something like, say, a zombie. So only when this virus infects a cell does this genetic material wake up and start functioning. So no, a virus does not have a nucleus. Next. So another question is it possible to see a single cell? Because as you all know, a cell is very small, right? So can we see a single cell? And the answer is it will depend. Next, please. So it's not like you can never see it, but there are very specific conditions where you can see it. Next, please. For example, a fertilized egg, such as an ostrich egg or any bird egg, is actually a single cell. That leads to my next question. Next, please. Are we eating or are we using single cells when we are making an omelette? And the answer is no, we are not. because the cells that we buy from the store are mostly chicken eggs. And the hen egg is not a single cell. It is usually unfertilized for one. So it does not have the components. And it is made up of two components, primarily the white, which is the albumin, and the yolk, which we all know, which has got some fat. In the case of a fertilized chicken egg, yes, it will have some cells called blastomeres, which are present inside the yolk, and they will consume the protein component to develop and form the baby bird or the chick. So those are the only eggs which will have cells. But otherwise, the cells, eggs that we buy from the store, they are not single cells. Next, please. And this is a fairly recent discovery in the Andaman Islands near India. And these umbrella-shaped structures are actually single cells. So they were called Acetabularia jalkanya. And for those of you who know Sanskrit, Jal is water and Kanya is daughter. So basically, the daughter of the water or a mermaid. So these are all actually single cells. And yes, these are very large. As you can see, some person is holding it and you can see their hand. So yeah, cells like these are obviously visible. So yeah, that brings us to the last slide. And thank you for being a wonderful audience. And if you have any questions, we can go to them at the moment.
Thank you so much, Shalini. These were amazing facts that we all learned today. So many new things as well about not just the nucleus, but its functions and what are some ways that it can harm us if it malfunctions. So thank you so much for taking out the time to make these slides and share it with us today.